The alliance between the United States and the European countries is not exactly having its best moment right now. Donald Trump has made quite an entrance and has jeopardized the relationship of these nations to an extent that they could even possibly break up. We have seen that with the Paris Agreement.
Make our planet great again.
And also with Donald Trump's position towards NATO, the most powerful military organization in history.
And I never asked once what the new NATO headquarters cost. I refuse to do that.
In this video, we're going to focus on this organization. We're going to look at what's happening with NATO, why Donald Trump is criticizing it so much, and what the future is for this organization. But before we get into any of that, let's get some perspective.
NATO, a look back.
Shortly after the end of World War II, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization took its first steps. It was born in 1949 with a very clear mission: restrain, stop, and, if needed, defeat the Soviet Union. The Cold War had just started, and there was an atmosphere of tension. The Berlin blockade had already taken place, and the Czech Communist Party had completely taken control with a coup d'etat. At that time, nobody knew what was going to happen, and the possibility of war was very, very real. So let's take a look at the historical context. The world had just gone through World War II. Europe was destroyed, and there was an absolute distrust on both sides. The truth is that a war wouldn't have been a surprise, and that was the situation which existed when NATO was born.
In the beginning, NATO was formed by the United States, Canada, and 10 European countries: France, Italy, the United Kingdom, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Denmark, Norway, Iceland, and Portugal. A few years later, the Federal Republic of Germany, or Western Germany, was added to that list.
The original purpose of the idea, its spirit so to speak, was to bring forces together. If a member country was attacked, it was seen as if all the members had been attacked as well. All for one and one for all, right? Well, yes, but also not quite, because there was quite a lot of small print.
NATO after the Cold War.
However, that all changed in 1991. The fall of the Soviet Union left NATO with no clear purpose. Without an enemy, what is the point of the alliance? That is a question many people asked, and many still do today. But wait one second, because against all odds, it was actually after the fall of the Soviet Union that the organization started to play a more active role.
And it has taken action quite frequently since then. This includes Serbia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Libya, control over the Baltic Sea, against piracy in the Indian Ocean, and recently, support for the fight against ISIS.
It was also during this time when more new countries signed up. Since it started, incorporations have been regular, but since 1991, incorporations have really sped up.
In 1949, there were 12 countries in NATO. Today there are 28. Many of these countries are from the old Warsaw Pact, a similar thing to NATO but led by the Soviet Union.
And Putin's Russia has never liked that. In fact, the war of 2008 between Russia and Georgia took place partly because Georgia wanted to become a member of NATO. And something similar has happened in the Ukraine. And after the recent crisis in Ukraine and the clash between them and Russia, NATO seems to have sped up again. Also in 2016, an immediate action force was set up. This is made of 5,000 soldiers capable of deploying very quickly and in almost any place. The so-called Spearhead Force has 5,000 soldiers that are part of a larger rapid action force of 40,000 soldiers. In order to coordinate its deployment, the alliance has created, since September 2014, 8 support headquarters in all the countries that used to be under Soviet influence. And in 2017, the United States made the largest troop deployment in Europe since the Cold War, following a NATO mission.
Thousands of US troops arrive in Europe in one of the largest deployments since the Cold War.
We are talking about more than 4,000 soldiers and hundreds of tanks and armored vehicles already being deployed in Eastern Europe on a mission that reminds us of the initial mission of NATO to discourage Russia from any expansionist temptations. However, despite all of this activity, the role of NATO is still uncertain, and the United States is still unhappy with the commitments from the organization's European partners.
The anger of the United States.
As we were saying earlier on, the mutual defense guarantee, if a member of NATO is attacked, is not as clear as it seems. Take a look at Article 5, the one that regulates this situation.
The parties agree that an armed attack against one or more of them shall be considered an attack against them all, and consequently they agree that, if such an attack occurs, each of them will assist the party or parties so attacked by taking forthwith such actions as it deems necessary, including the use of armed force. Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty.
Including the use of armed force. This means that if a country were to suffer an attack, it doesn't mean the rest have to give immediate military support. And that is why all of the presidents of the United States since Harry Truman have taken advantage of the first NATO meeting they attended to interpret Article 5 as a commitment of military force. However, Donald Trump hasn't. He was expected to do so during the inauguration of a monument for victims of 9/11 in Brussels, where he attended his first NATO meeting. Indeed, he was asked to do so by the European countries. The White House have said that they would, but a final commitment was not forthcoming. There are analysts that think this is a major issue, and they refer to this as one of the biggest diplomatic mistakes of all time. Other analysts don't think this is so important, but what is undeniable is that this has not been well received in Europe, especially for these reasons.
Up until now, the only country which has invoked Article 5 was the United States. They did it after 9/11, and they received immediate support from all members of NATO.
Well, the thing is that Trump didn't want to offer support, and actually he took advantage of his speech to recriminate the alleged lack of commitment by his European allies.
Dissing the Europeans while dedicating a monument to remember the 888 European, 158 Canadian, and 2,396 American troops who died in Afghanistan took some doing. Thomas Wright.
But Trump is not the only one angry about it. Obama, he had the same opinion. And the question is now, why is the United States so angry at NATO? Well, basically, because they claim that the European members of NATO are not committed enough or don't spend enough money.
As a rule, all NATO members are committed to spending at least 2% of their GDP on defense. However, only a few countries are meeting this commitment. These include the United Kingdom, Poland, Estonia, Greece, and of course the United States.
The rest, well, they're quite some way from spending that amount. Just take a look at what Trump's Secretary of Defense James Mattis has to say about the European countries.
Americans cannot care more for your children's future security than you do.
Now, wait a second, because does this mean that the European countries don't spend money on defense? Well, that's certainly not the case. In fact, if we add up all of the budgets of all European countries that are members of NATO, these countries spend $250 billion every year. So if these countries were one, it would be the country with the second highest military spending after only the United States. So if it's money we're talking about, it's not that spending has been reduced, or at least not relative to the threats that the world is currently facing. Times, they're pretty different, and we don't live with the Soviet Union anymore.
An obsession of the United States?
Let us say it loud and clear. The world has changed and we are facing different difficulties than we were in the 1960s. The risk today is not the possibility of a great war. This risk has been reduced by globalization, trade, and mutually assured destruction. The threats we face today can be found in terrorism, piracy, cyber warfare, and the risk of the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. So must we fight these risks? Well, certainly, but this is something that we won't accomplish with more tanks. We also need to consider that we are dealing with a very different kind of war today, something known as hybrid warfare, where combat isn't like what it was in old movies. Modern wars are more and more often about guerrillas and groups aimed at destabilizing nations. Further, there is political pressure, economic penalties, cyber warfare, interference in election processes, intelligence operations, etc., that make war much more complicated.
The mistakes of Europe.
One thing is clear, NATO members are not doing everything right. On the one hand, the organization has established more sensible conditions. 20% of the budget should be spent on equipment. And here, even European countries, which spend more on soldiers than they need, still aren't meeting this requirement. On the other hand, European countries are still quite disorganized and use very different systems, which makes production, maintenance, and deployment more and more expensive. Just have a look at what happens with tanks.
The United States primarily uses one kind of tank, the Abrams tank, while the Europeans use up to 19 different models.
Imagine the chaos when a joint deployment has to be organized. They can't even share the same replacement equipment. And, well, the same is true for much more than just tanks. And so the final question is, can NATO play a significant role in the future? In our opinion here at VisualPolitik, yes, they absolutely can, but only after a bit of a perspective shift. We feel that countries can spend money better and actually share resources rather than just spending more, even though that might upset some military contractors. Well, now we'd like to know your opinion. What should the future of NATO be? Do you think that the European countries should meet the US's demands, or do you think NATO should focus less on conventional warfare? Or maybe you think NATO should just dissolve? Let us know what you think in the comments below. So, well, I really hope you enjoyed that video, and please do hit that like button if you did, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already for brand new videos every Monday and Thursday, and don't forget to check out our friends at the Reconsider Media podcast. They provided the vocals in this episode that aren't mine, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.